Story 1. There's something in Rim Forest, California. Hey r/nasleep. I had just recently got back from a camping trip with my girlfriend earlier this week near the small town of Rim Forest, California, just a few miles from Lake Arrowhead. It was my girlfriend's first camping experience ever, and it will certainly go down in the books as quite an experience, as this trip has prompted me to share with you guys our story. Now, I'm no expert camper, but I'd like to think that I've been on enough trips, perhaps the bare minimum, to at least somewhat not resemble an idiot out in the wild against the odds. I used to enjoy camping with my family back in my younger years, but in retrospect, all those trips were really tame compared to even the most mundane expeditions my friends back in grade school would embark on during summer vacation. Bug spray, sunscreen, hats and sunglasses, campfires, lanterns, portable stoves, and electric heaters. Sure, we had no RV or trailer, but we had all the inner workings to exist comfortably externally and all the makings of a grand old time. All that being said, I can tell you for a fact that a resurgence of overzealous nostalgic joy overcame me when my girlfriend asked if I wanted to go camping with her this week, but even with all my trips back in my youth, nothing prepared me for what I experienced in Rim Forest, California. We left for our trip early at noon. A 2-day getaway, just my girlfriend, me, and our dog. I'd been needing a break from my everyday life, and she was all done with her finals. We had planned for our trip a week prior and had taken care of all the necessary shopping in true millennial fashion via the internet. Excited we were, as we made our steady climb in her Prius up the winding roads to Lake Arrowhead with enough vigor to rival even that of the little engine that could. Armed with 1 bar of signal, we reached the campground moments before our cell service gave in. We had stopped at an empty post at the entrance to the campground when we had noticed a peculiar sign on the service window: "Camp hosts watching grounds." Without thinking much of it, we grab a few maps from the kiosk and proceed to let ourselves in. The place was real quaint. About 120 to 140 campsites and only 15 of them currently being rented. It was a little unexciting on the scenic side of things, but we couldn't complain. It was cheap and we were allowed to bring our dog. When we arrived at our site, we were pleased to see we at least had one neighbor to keep us company in the event of total isolation when night approaches, a middle-aged couple with an armada of big dogs. Not the mean, ferocious type, though I am a lover of all dogs, mind you, but the kind that would just give you that lackadaisical head tilt and pass only a complete, careless glance if you so happen to make eye contact with them. "What nice dogs they have," says my girlfriend. And what a nice campground we chose. Save for the neighboring RV, it was just us in the wild, and we couldn't have asked for anything more. After taking it all in, we hastily unloaded our car only to run into our first problem: setting up the tent. Now again, I like to think I'm not an idiot, as I guess I can say now the only camping I've done without my parents was Coachella 2015 and a wilderness sabbatical with some friends in the desert that same year, so I've at least set up 2 tents in my life. Nothing too intense that I can't handle, heh. The tent setup actually went off without a hitch. It was just one stake proved to be a little too hard to hammer. A half hour after pitching the tent, the final stake had uprooted itself from the ground, causing the wireframes to jolt. But with much deliberation and a little help from some all-natural paperweights provided to us by the great outdoors, we planted that sucker right back into the earth, and it hasn't budged since. By this point, my girl decides it's high time we cook some lunch, and as we get to it, an old couple on a golf cart approaches the both of us. "Why, hello there," the elderly woman greets us. "Are you here with a reservation?" "As a matter of fact, we are," says my girl. Since we spent quite a while pitching our tent, I decide to use the restroom. I figure my girlfriend would speak to them as she made our reservations, so I made a break for the restroom and came back just as the camp host was going over the last of the ground rules. "What a cute dog you have, by the way. Be sure to keep it on a leash at all times." "Oh, she doesn't tend to get far away from me. She gets separation anxiety." "It's just for safety," the elderly man finally speaks up, correcting his spectacles as he chuckles. "Wouldn't want her to get snatched up by something now, would ya?" he says with a smile. "We'll keep her leashed," I reply. Funny I didn't think too much of that sign from the post at the entrance in the beginning. And a little funnier how all the previous r/no sleep entries I've read in the past about forest rangers, goatmen, wendigos, and other strange happenings in the woods all caught up to me that moment. My girlfriend fancies the Twilight Zone, but one no sleep story really did a number on her, so I know any mention of this sort would land me in the doghouse for sure. That was pretty weird, my girl says under her breath, as the hosts were off in their golf cart. What, the last thing they said? Yeah. Well, let's just keep her leashed and keep a close eye on her. Don't think about it too much, sugar. Let's go make lunch. The trip was panning out to be quite lovely. We made some spaghetti in my mom's slow cooker whilst snacking on chips as we waited for our lunch to get ready. We drank a little to lift our spirits and smoked a ton to ease the nerves. It goes without saying that I'd certainly revisit Rim Forest quite soon, but in the corners of my mind once I got home, as this was more than what we expected. Just a relaxing time up in the woods with my girl. After we ate, we decided to take our dog for a walk around the campground. It was 6 p.m. and since all we did was set up camp and eat, we figured that this would be our hike for the evening. It was starting to get a little colder, so we decided on our hike we'd head to the groundkeeper's post to buy some firewood so we could get our campfire started. As we made our way up the paths of the empty campground, we came to find the groundkeeper's post deserted. "Anyone here?" I asked, knocking on their door. It dawned on me that the old couple were the only two people running this whole place, and when I remembered the sign that greeted us at the entrance, I came to the conclusion that perhaps they're still making their rounds through the entire place. We headed back to our campsite with our blankets in mind as the temperature started to lower at a rapid rate. We agreed upon the idea of waiting at the campsite to hopefully catch the elder couple on their way back up to their lodge. 30 minutes pass and no sign of anybody. The couple next to us has been in their RV all day, and with the temperature dropping, we knew there'd be no sign of seeing them come out anytime soon. An hour passes and still nobody. "Think we should wait a little while longer, honey?" my girlfriend asks me. "I dunno, babe. I think we should probably wait in the tent." The sun had set and we were all shivering at this point, dog included. If we heard their golf cart, we could just get out of the tent and get their attention, so we decided to get in the tent. We grabbed a couple things from the car since at this point, we realized we wouldn't be leaving the tent anymore in the evening as it was blistering cold outside. We changed into our PJs and mummified ourselves with our sheets as we made a few sandwiches to snack on. We waited in the warmth. Nothing but the sounds of nature. "Let's just go to sleep," I say. No point now to wait since it's dark outside and the weather was uninviting. "Think we should maybe leave tomorrow?" I can hear the reluctance as she asked. "Hey, I had a great time, baby, even if we don't stay the planned 2 days." I kiss her on the forehead and we lulled off to sleep. The night was peaceful. We had only the wilderness to score the rest of this evening's motion picture, so sleep only came right after getting accustomed to the nighttime corral of the critters. Though my girlfriend was next to me, I was alone in a battle of wits against myself as I shoved back any irrational fear that came to mind. When you're thrown into a scenario you've once read about, you can't help but assume the worst. It took a lot of tiny reminders to keep myself in check. I've been camping before, so this isn't anything new to expect. I kept thinking back to my desert trip last year and how that was an even scarier scenario, with real things to fear. There aren't any rattlesnakes here in the woods. No scorpions or any weird poisonous insects of the sort either. What do I know though? I'm no camper. Fact of the matter is, even being as inexperienced as I am with the outdoors, I know to respect the wilderness and to leave MB in the event that I ever encounter anything. After all, nature's got a whole arsenal of things that can kill you if you don't know any better. As I was pushing all those fears back to from where they came, I was startled by a scratching noise I heard against the tent's nylon. I gripped my girlfriend's shoulder, scared out of my wits, but thankfully, it was just our dog. "She needs to pee," my girlfriend mutters, face deep in her pillow. I tell her to go back to sleep and that I'll take the dog out. I shuffle out of the seats and scramble to find the zipper of the tent door. In a daze, I open the tent door all the way before even thinking that I would need any light. Darkness. Complete utter darkness. I snapped out of my hypnosis cast on me by the darkness when I remembered my duty. I gotta step outside to let the dog pee. I remembered the lantern and armed myself with a sense of security before leashing up the dog and setting foot into the dark. You've done shit like this before, it's no big deal. Over and over again in my head. We didn't wander too far from the tent, but each step I took would have been engulfed in total blackness had it not been for the light. Once she was done, we booked it straight for the tent. I woke my girlfriend on my way in and she ushered me to return to our huddle. Scary out there, I say in her ear. She pulls my arm over her being and holds it to her chest. You're here now, she whispers, and with that, we dozed back off. The night progressed. My girlfriend was fast asleep and again, I was left alone to my thoughts. I began to notice though that this time around, the evening chatter of the wild was nowhere to be heard. Only the occasional gust of wind would greet us with the sound of leaves among other things brushing up against our tent. It was starting to feel eerie. I couldn't help but think about how nice our neighbors must have it. Nice and warm in their RV, with actual, rigid walls around them to keep them safe from the outside. I don't think I'd ever buy an RV. I'll probably eat those words later in my life, but for right now, camping in a trailer or RV isn't really camping in my mind's eye. But then again, how many inches of separation between them and the wild does one constitute that theirs are too thick to be considered camping? Like I said, it was just me and my mind going back and forth with each other with each and every thought furthering myself from slumber. I wasn't having a miserable time, no, I was just psyching myself out. After all, I shouldn't have anything to be afraid of as I've got my girlfriend with me in our tent away from the wild. If it's one thing, it's much more dangerous in my head than it is in this tent here with what brings me the most comfort. But just as I was beginning to calm down, my ears did me the disservice of picking up something that at that present moment I didn't wish to hear. A twig snapped somewhere in the distance. All right. This is it. The moment your entire pristine camping career has been waiting for. I would have easily dismissed it as the wilderness around us and go back to not caring had the rest of the forest sounds been present, but with how silent it's been, I couldn't help but hone in on where that snap came from. I knew my mind would eat this shit up. More fodder for it to process into another worst-case scenario that I'll have the unpleasure of thinking about in no time. Even the wind quieted down as I was focusing my hearing to the outside. The snap wasn't too close to our sight, but what had me in anticipation was what will I hear next and where. While honing in on the silence, my ears pick up another noise. A footstep. I discerned it to be a footstep by the sound the earth made from below, a trudgy, mulchy, heavy-sounding foot against the soft earth surrounding our campsite. It wasn't a thud or a thump, but a calculated footstep as if it were trying to be inaudible. I heard another one. I was trying to decipher the footfall of what was coming to our tent to hear if it belonged to an animal or a human. It was moving at such an uneven pace, but I was still able to clearly hear step after step, closer and closer. It was headed to our tent. My arm tightened around my girlfriend as the two of us were huddled together. I couldn't tell if she was still sleeping, but as the footsteps continued, that question was answered as I felt my girlfriend's grip on my arm tighten as well. Did you hear that? I muttered the quietest yes I could. Awake and alert, we began listening together in fear of what's to come next. My mind couldn't stop racing. There were brushes against the tent that only heightened the fear we were feeling. Panicked, my girlfriend says to breathe with our mouths in a yelling yet whispering fashion. I was thinking about the sign that we saw at the entrance of the camp. I was thinking about the last thing the old man said about keeping our dog on a leash. I couldn't help but actually feel that there was something out there. Then it happened. From the corner where our heads were resting, the fiberglass wireframe began to shake violently as if it were being strummed like a guitar. I couldn't tell what was louder at this point, the metallic vibration of the wireframe reverberating or the thump of my heart, beating sporadically in my chest echoing all the way up into my ears. We were all huddled together by now. I held on to my girlfriend while she cuddled our dog. We were holding on for dear life. I kept saying to my girlfriend over and over that the noise was just our tent. We spent a good while hammering that last stake in, It must have untimely uprooted itself, and the release of tension was causing our tent to shake. It took all my being to calm my girlfriend down. My own fears just weren't important anymore. "We'll go home in the morning, baby. I'm right here, hun, it's all over now." We were holding on for dear life. I kept saying to my girlfriend over and over that the noise was just our tent. We spent a good while hammering that last stake in. It must have untimely uprooted itself, and the release of tension was causing our tent to shake. It took all my being to calm my girlfriend down. My own fears just weren't important anymore. "We'll go home in the morning, baby. I'm right here, hun, it's all over now." Story 2. Dead bodies keep washing up on the shores of Pismo Beach, California, but no one seems to notice. I was born and raised in this little gem of 5 cities, California. I had nothing but good memories for many years while growing up here. My first kiss, skateboarding downtown, surfing and playing sports with friends, I wouldn't trade these memories for the world. We have great weather, shops, restaurants, beaches, and even a butterfly national park. It truly is a little slice of heaven on earth. But something freaky has been happening recently, and I'm the only one who seems to notice. My friends and family think I'm crazy now. A few days ago, after work, I decided to head to the beach to unwind by myself. As I parked my car and started walking towards the sand, I noticed something laying near the shore. As I drew closer, I stopped in my tracks when I saw what I was. A body, bloated with blue, peeling skin. It was a male who looked to be around 40. I screamed and pointed at it as the other beachgoers all stopped what they were doing and looked at me in shock. A female in a wetsuit grabbed me and tried to calm me down and to figure out what was wrong with me. I looked at her in confusion and shock when she asked me that. How did she not see it? How did no one else see it? I pointed towards the body again and said, "There's a dead body right on the shore. How are you people not seeing it?" The woman and the other beachgoers looked towards to where I pointed and looked back towards me. They all had either looks of confused, annoyment, and some even amused as if I was joking around, and some even chuckled. The woman then told me to grow up and that jokes like that are not funny before walking away while shaking her head. Most of the other beachgoers were in agreement, but a few teenagers called me a great actress. One woman even scolded me while holding her crying child, that I clearly terrified with my terrifying story. They all eventually went back to their business. I stood and frozen in shock for a minute, before slowly turning my head back towards to where the body was, hoping I only imagined it. But it was still there. A few little kids were stepping on it as they ran towards the water, which confirmed I was the only one who could actually see it. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer and headed back towards my cart. I wanted to call the police, but what would I tell them? Yeah, hey cops, I see a dead body at the beach, but no one else can see it. So can you guys send someone out here? I knew I'd be wasting time, so I just headed home. I told my mom what happened, and after listening to me, she assumed that I watched many horror shows. "You've always had an active imagination. Get more sleep at night and stop watching scary movies." That was her advice. I called my best friend and told her the same thing, and she laughed and told me to avoid laced weed. My own friend made fun of me over it. I spent the rest of the day being paranoid and freaked out. What was happening to me? I had a night filled with terrible dreams. I saw that same man screaming for help as ocean waves dragged him down into the darkness below. I woke up in a cold sweat around 2 in the morning. I felt something in my body that told me that I had to go to the beach at that moment. I don't even know why I didn't hesitate. Something came over me as I wasn't even afraid of what I would see at a dark and empty beach with that corpse there. I threw on a heavy jacket, put my shoes on and drove back down to the beach. I wasn't even thinking about anything other than figuring this out. Once I got to the beach parking lot and stepped out of the car, I felt a creeping feeling all across my body, but something pushed me forward. I walked towards the shore of the beach and I saw dark figures all laying near the water. I knew they were all human. There had to be at least 20 bodies there. I used my flashlight on my phone to see them better. Some were kids as young as 5 years old. They all were faced up and laying on their backs, looking towards the night sky with horrified dead, blank eyes. They all looked like the man that I saw the day before, bloated and pale bluish skinned, but that man's corpse was nowhere to be found. I still wasn't convinced that I was truly sane anymore. So I began taking photos of the bodies with shaking hands. They were all visible in the pics. I was completely relieved that there was something paranormal going out now, and I wouldn't need to be thrown in Arkham Asylum. I then hurried out of there and headed back home. I didn't sleep at all, I just kept staring at those pictures I took of those apparently invisible dead bodies. I decided to send them to a few friends of mine to prove that I wasn't nuts, but every one of them simply asked why I took pics of the shore in the dark. My best friend that laughed at me earlier then told me that I may need to go see a counselor or something. She was not amused by my antics. I truly am starting to feel like I'm going crazy. I didn't stop at the beach after work today, but I did drive by it afterwards. There were even more dead bodies there. Many were on the beach sand next to the beachgoers, but no one could see them. Some people stood on top of them while admiring the ocean from the sand. One man even had his beach towel spread over the top of a female corpse and was laying on top of it. How is this possible? I hope that someone reading this will believe me. I can't be losing my mind. Does anyone know what I'm dealing with? I'm beyond scared and confused. Help. Stories 3. I'm a hunter in the mountains of California. My latest kill wasn't a deer. The rangers just drove away, so I think I'm clear to write now. If you read the title, then you know I'm a hunter. And before I tell the story, I think there are some misconceptions about hunters that I need to clear up. First off, I respect the wildlife. I don't kill for sport, and most of us don't either. I live in a secluded cabin deep in the mountains. The nearest actual store is an hour or so from my cabin, so I find it easier to hunt deer instead of making that drive every time I need food. And second off, if I see an animal who is injured, I put it out of its misery. That's not really a misconception, just a good segue into the story, since that's how it started. I was on a trip into the woods, venturing to a flower-filled meadow that deer seemed to love grazing and frolicking in. Usually, there were several there, but this time there were none. Odd. After 45 minutes of nothing, I tromped out into the field and took off my mufflers, my ears immediately being hit with the sound of a wounded deer. I figured I'd better put a bullet in its head instead of leaving it to suffer. I followed the sound and found a deer laying down on its side, intestines leaking from a large gash on its side. I took out my revolver I kept with me for this particular task and took aim. Just then I heard the crashing of bushes and branches snapping to my right. Something was coming. Based on the sounds, a bear maybe. I saw a boulder a few paces away, so I jumped behind it and waited. When the sounds stopped, I peeked out from behind my spot. A lone deer was standing over the wounded one, sniffing it and nudging it. I was confused and about to reveal myself when the deer looked around, as if checking that no one was watching. Then it grew. Its bones grew into spindly limbs, tearing its flesh at its joints, and the smell of fresh blood wafted my way. Its antlers grew longer and more tangled, while its teeth, previously meant for chewing plants, shifted into a carnivorous maw. It began to use a pair of new clawed hands to tear the wounded deer open further and eat the organs that fell out. I tried not to let my breakfast come back up while planning on what to do next. My rifle was about 20 yards away, and I wasn't sure how fast the thing that was feeding was. I eventually decided on a mad dash to my gun, hoping it didn't chase me. I counted down from 3 and took off towards my dropped weapon. Behind me, I heard the thing I was dreading. The thing was after me. Shit, 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 shit. I jumped at my rifle and snatched it, whipping around and shooting a desperate blank in the thing's direction. I covered my face, so I didn't see my shot hit it in the shoulder. It let out a sound that echoed off every tree in the dark woods behind it. While it was still reeling, I pulled out my revolver and ran up, holding the barrel about an inch from its forehead. I fired the killing shot. I realized that I had better report this to a forest ranger or even the police, but ended up picking the first one. I showed them the body and they went silent. Without a word, they loaded up the corpse into their pickup truck and drove off. So now I'm at my desk writing this, and, well, I don't think I have much time left. I keep hearing something screeching, and I have no doubt it's another one of those things. I can hear them tapping and scratching on my window. If these are my last words, then I have a warning. There is an unknown species in the woods of California. And they look like deer. Story 4. Back roads. I live in a small, isolated town in rural California, the kind of area that is only surrounded by fields and farms. The next closest town is a 15-minute drive down a dusty highway, but it's more of a truck stop, only containing a few actual homes. Naturally, like every other small town, we have an uncountable amount of scary stories, everything from ghost activity to UFO sightings. My favorite was always the rumor that you can see mysterious lights glowing from the bottom of a man-made lake that happens to sit where a ghost town used to. I myself have experienced a number of spooky things here, but they've all been minor and able to explain away once the fear died down. At least, until last night. The main highway runs directly through the center of town, and it's mostly crowded by commuters and large cargo-carrying trucks, so I tend to travel through the back roads that run along the borders. It's pretty empty back there, and if you go out far enough you reach abandoned neighborhoods that were never fully built. It's very quiet, and admittedly creepy, only seeing life for drug deals and backseat love affairs. Most of the roads either loop back around to the main part of town, or stop dead where they lay, except one vacant path I personally had never traveled until recently, since it has no street lights or lane dividers. The night curiosity finally got the best of me. I was with my friend CJ. We were out driving, bored out of our minds, just looking for something to pass the time. I brought up the path, and he encouraged me to see where it led, having never been down it himself either. It didn't take much convincing. CJ's built like a linebacker, so if we did find any trouble I knew he could get us out of it better than I could. Driving toward that dark road, I felt only confidence that we wouldn't find anything of interest, but once we reached the stop sign that divided it from the rest of the town, I started to clam up a little. It sounds cliché, but something about that area never sat right with me, but trying to avoid ridicule, I pressed on anyway. The land was flat, so we could still see the far-off lights from town to our left, so we used them as a guide to see how far the road went. That method soon went out the window, however, as we passed the edge of town in no time, and there was still no end to the road in sight. Soon, we were in pitch darkness, with my headlights being the only source of light for miles. That was when the wall of fog hit us, enveloping the car in a dim white mist until I could barely see anymore. "This is getting creepy," CJ grinned, looking all around and out every window. We saw nothing, just dim fog, and the faint outline of grass bordering the edges of the road. By this point we'd been driving for a good 10 minutes, and I made sure to check the clock. 7:44. "Should we turn around?" I asked, trying my best not to sound scared. "It doesn't look like there's anything out here." "It's up to you, man," CJ replied, rolling the window down as he lit a cigarette. "It's your car. I want to see how far we can go, but I'm not the one driving. I don't know what made me keep going. I'm very into the paranormal, so maybe it was the potential for a good scare." Another 5 minutes passed, and this is the point I got really unsettled. Our town is at the base of tall, rolling mountains, but for some reason I couldn't see any, even though we should have been going toward them. Had I turned without noticing? That would explain why we hadn't passed the truck stop town yet, but it would had to have been a significant turn for us to completely lose sight of everything. I blamed the fog, trying to shake it off. Maybe I was disoriented from not being able to see more than 10 feet in front of me. At 20 minutes, the radio cut out, and CJ hooked his phone up to the AUX to replace it. He went into his music folder, pressed play, and nothing happened. There were no sounds, except the low, dull static from the AUX. We tried my phone. Nothing. I think CJ realized I was getting anxious, and I knew he would try to mess with me. Hell, he probably hadn't even plugged my phone in all the way, and was just trying to make me think something was wrong. I'm a horror junkie, sure, but I scare very easily, so instead I decided to mess with him back. "I half expect to see Resurrection Mary out here," I commented. "Who?" he asked, still fiddling with the phones. "You've never heard that one?" I continued, she's the original ghost hitchhiker, or the most reported, or some shit like that. She's supposed to jump out in front of your car, and then you see her in the rearview mirror, sitting in the back seat. He didn't look up, and I could see him chuckling in the light from the phone, but I did manage to make him jump out of his skin when I tapped the brakes a little too hard. We both needed a good laugh, and that seemed to do the trick. However, the lightheartedness of the moment shattered when a rock hit the windshield, cracking it a little. We both let out a scream as the car skidded to a stop. It was so dark I had to make sure my headlights hadn't turned off, and I waited for my eyes to adjust. The bridge we were on was the first thing to come into full view, and I began to notice a dry, empty riverbed below us. The next thing I saw, I'll never forget for as long as I live. There were people at the other end of the bridge, stood in a large group, blocking the entire road. My headlights weren't enough to illuminate any features, but I could tell they were mostly tall, thin silhouettes. CJ grabbed my arm hard, and I saw that he was staring out the open window at 5 more people coming out of the grass toward the car. One of them was dragging something heavy that audibly scraped across the ground as they walked. It sounded metallic. I lost it. I immediately threw the car in reverse and sped backwards off the bridge, turning around as soon as the road allowed me to do so. CJ was rolling up the windows and locking all the doors. I could see that his hands were shaking. We were immediately bathed in an unnaturally bright light, and looking up, I saw headlights behind us. "Go, go!" CJ yelled. I fucking floored it. I'd never driven that fast in my life, but the headlights were still gaining on us. I felt tears well up in my eyes, and I thought for sure we would be hit. I knew in my heart we were going to die. And then, all at once, the fog suddenly dissipated, leaving us in the clear blackness of the night. I don't know how it's possible, but in the distance I could see the lights from the town. I near pissed myself when the radio started blaring, and I realized my phone was still plugged into the AUX. I noticed the time, then. 7:46. We caught our breath when we hit the stop sign at the edge of the town, and I just broke down. CJ looked ready to pass out from sheer terror. Neither of us could say a word. It took an hour for us to calm back down enough to try to speak rationally about what had happened. For all we knew, we hallucinated the whole thing, but even if that's the case, I've never felt fear like I did in that moment. That was last night, and I've still come to no conclusions about what might have actually happened. My windshield is still cracked, so it's hard for me to deny that it was real. I'm thinking about going back there in the daytime, to see if anything changes. I'll update if I do. The only thing I know for sure is that I'm never driving the back roads at night again.